All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a discussion of the second season, episode 1 of Wheel of Time. Yes, A Critical Dragon and I are continuing to discuss this series. We did the entire first season on our channels last year. We trade back and forth. I think I had episode 1 last year. I can't remember exactly what we did, but
You always take episode 1, you big meanie.
that's me. That's me. Number one, numero uno. So
Once again, Dr. Fantasy proving the fact that his name is because he lives in a fantasy world.
yeah, well, it's easier that way, isn't it?
With
So
your fireproof tweed underwear.
that's right. Well, it is important to protect oneself. So we are going to discuss this. And just to be transparent, if you didn't watch us last year talking about season 1, both of us have read the series, and I would describe myself as a fan of Wheel of Time, not a mega fan. I'm not a wheelie. I did enjoy the series when I read it, where I was probably reading it, finished it more than a decade ago, I would say. When the last book came out, I read it right when it came out, and that was the last I read Wheel of Time. So that's more than a decade ago, I think. So I'm a little rusty on the facts of the original series, the lore, if you will, which doesn't bother me one bit because I tend to approach an adaptation as an independent story from the original source material. So we're not going to be discussing all the differences between the books and the adaptation. We're more interested in analyzing the adaptation itself as storytelling. Is that correct, AP? Where are you coming from on this?
Well, the last time I read The Wheel of Time was at the start of the pandemic.
Okay,
So
more recently than me. Yeah.
yeah, but even if it's more recent, still a while back. And
Yeah.
so again, I could probably go and reread the books all over again. But
Right.
as you said, like, this is an adaptation, and the key to all of this is, and I think this is something that fundamentally different people have different approaches on.
Right.
I look at adaptation as you look at the thing and you see what the thing is doing, and then you look at the what it has been adapted from, the source material, to see
Right.
what it did, and then you draw your comparisons. But if you start with the premise of, I know the books, and I'm not going to see how this thing replicates the books, I feel that you're missing the point of what an adaptation is,
Mm-hmm.
because it's taking material and it's retelling that story in a different format and a different way. That's what adaptation is. And if you start with the lens of what is different, you're going to find all of the differences. And particularly if you value replication as the key thing that you want, you're going to get increasingly annoyed and negative.
Right.
And if you become increasingly annoyed and negative, you're not engaging with what the adaptation is doing. You're engaging with what the adaptation isn't doing. And it's a very simple frame of mind to approach something. A perfect example of this: if you took Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring and you sat,
Mm-hmm.
you read the book, and then you look at Peter Jackson's version and you start noting down every divergence from The Fellowship of the Ring,
Or
you would
Tom
go,
Bombadil. Yeah.
hi. But not even Tom Bond.
Oh,
Think
I
even at
know.
the very beginning
That's the
in
most
the Shire.
obvious. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, but in the very beginning in the Shire, you go, oh well, why are Merry and Pippin messing around with the fireworks? And where did this whole scene where they're
Right.
washing dishes come from because Gandalf is punishing them? Like, this is just fan fiction. They Peter Jackson obviously thinks that he's a better writer than Tolkien. You go,
No.
because if you have that mindset when you approach, you are fundamentally looking at it by assuming primacy of the source material and
Mm.
then going, this is diverging, and always looking for divergence. But if you start with the adaptation and you look at it and you go, what is the story that is being told here? How does that connect to the source material?
Right.
You then start seeing similarities. You see what they are doing the same. You see how they are telling the same story, but
Right.
in a different way. And it's up to every individual viewer and reader to decide how they want to do things. personally, I think it is more rewarding and more enjoyable to try and view what a an adaptation is doing, and then think about the source material,
Right.
because the superficial changes or the superficiality of going, this is different, but that's what
Okay.
we did in high school, of like,
Right.
one of these things is not like the others, and oh look, this is different. You go, okay, it's different, but what was that thing in the original? What did it mean? How did it do it? Why was it doing it? What is the meaning behind it? Now, how have they addressed this in the show? How are they communicating that meaning? How are they communicating that story beat? How are
Yeah.
they addressing that? It's not about saying these things are different and this doesn't link to this plot point anymore. You go, that's really, really surface level. But again, every viewer, every reader is perfectly entitled to have their own opinion, the thing that they want, their preference. And you go, yeah, that's the nature of storytelling. Personally, I just feel it is more rewarding. See what the adaptation is doing
Yeah.
and then think about it. But
You're going
we're
to
all
get
book
more
readers.
from the
We
show.
typically prefer books.
You're going to be, I think, more likely to enjoy the show if you come at it with that mindset. By the way, everyone, in case you can't tell, AP has thought a little bit about adaptation. he has a PhD in fantasy literature with specializing in narratology. So this is something that you've talked about actually a fair amount on your channel. Just want to point that out. There's a lot of excellent videos, even though you are my nemesis, on this particular
And
topic.
and Philip, I would like to say thank you very much for the very positive framing of that, instead of saying, and AP talks about it ad nauseum.
You know me, I'm a nice nemesis, right? So I'm the nice one. That being said, we are going to get into the details of the first episode, and I will say that I'm looking forward to chatting with you, because I need to be convinced a little bit. I think we talked about it a little bit beforehand, and you seem to be a bit more positive on the first few episodes, and we're going to discuss episode 2 on your channel, and we're going to keep going back and forth. But you were a little more positive than I am. Not that I think it's awful. I do not think that these first episodes are a steaming pile of dung, and if Amazon wants to use that as an endorsement, they can. But not a steaming pile of dung, Philip Chase. So I did like aspects of it on my own, including, by the way, the prologue scene, which included the little girl who was a survivor of a horrible incident, and the part played by the Forsaken, one of the main baddies, who is Ishmael. And so there were aspects of this prologue that I really did like. I liked the nuance introduced from Ishmael's very persuasive perspective, in terms of, well, people think of me as a monster, but actually, and so I thought that was you had this innocent little girl as well, that he was, I mean, she's us in a way. We're the audience. She's like our presence in that scene in a way, which he is imposing himself upon with this interesting perspective that he's trying to put forth. And then he has her pet the Trolloc, nice Trolloc, So what did you think of the prologue? It was actually, to begin with, one of my favorite parts of episode 1.
I thought it was a great sequence. And I also think, now I could be wrong in this, but I think you've fallen into the trap that they put in the show. That little girl, we always assume children are so innocent, and yeah, she acts as our point of view because the camera follows her in. We go underneath the table. We see that dark friends are part of every society, because we get those little hints of,
Sean
even
Chan.
if we don't even if we don't necessarily know who they are, but we see that they're from all different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And you go, well, why is the little girl there? Because she's a dark friend too. If she was some sort of interloper,
Yeah.
if she was a normal person, why would they all allow her to
Would they
live?
allow her to be there? Yeah.
So you, my friend, now if this bears out, I'm going to be very smug. But
you smug? No.
and one of the things I loved about this is it recalled a certain sequence in Moby Dick, the opening of Moby Dick, call me Ishmael. And
Ishmael. Yeah.
Ishmael does everything but say, call me Ishmael. And
Yeah.
whether or not it was intended, whether or not that's what, you know, the writers wanted me to think, I thought this was a wonderful sort of inversion of the opening of Moby Dick, because he lists all of the evil things that people call him. And that's not who he is, because, you know, they call him a monster, but it all depends on perspective. And it's this persuasive, subjective reading of his position. And this is one of the, I think, one of the key differences between this TV show and the books. The books were very much point of view controlled narration, but with an omniscient standpoint, because everything that was said in the book we are meant to believe. And this seems much more subjective, much more unreliable narration. It's using the subjective perspective of characters, which is, you know, more and more common and more sort of de rigueur in fantasy storytelling, leaning into that focalization. Because Ishmael is never going to think of, oh yes, I'm evil, wahaha, let me twirl my mustache, I'm evil for evil's sake. He thinks he is justified in what he is doing. And other people, if they could only understand him, they would be on his side. Now, yeah, he may have sold his soul to the Dark One, but he needed to do that because it's the thing that you have to do to get the things that you need. So he knows he's not a paragon of virtue, but he believes in what he is doing. He doesn't go, I feel really bad choosing the evil path today. And that is the style of storytelling I think the showrunners are really leaning into, because we've had so much, like even in the first season, in the Wheel of Time, reincarnation happens. And yet in the books, we are told there's no evidence of this until a very certain point, where we get the perspective of someone who comes back from the dead and actually remembers their past lives. But for most people, it's a belief. But Jordan wrote the world in such a way that, oh yeah, it might be a belief, but it's just true. And for modern storytelling, you go, well, if it's just a belief, they may believe it, but they don't have proof, so it's faith. And if it's faith, there's always room for doubt. And so things like the prophecies, oh yeah, the prophecy was made, it must be true. Except in the books, we have lots of prophecies and people saying, oh, well, you know, this came true here. Well, no, it didn't come true. There's all of this confusion. And if there's confusion, if it can't be proven with fact, it's based on belief, and that leaves doubt. So the dragon is going to be reborn. We believe this. His spirit is going to be reborn. It's a belief. And there are all of these really powerful and strange people in this tiny little village. Well, which one is it? It's probably, almost certainly, one of the boys. But if the fate of the world is hanging on this, are you going to just ignore the fact that potentially, because reincarnation is a spirit into a body, it could have been one of the girls? You might think, I am 95% certain. Okay, fate of the world's resting on it. Well, just in case I'm wrong, I have a 1 in 20 chance of being wrong here, maybe it could be them. And you can understand that shred of doubt. But because we have that omniscient, the book has told us.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt in the books who the Dragon Reborn is pretty early on.
When we apply that to the show, which is actually using a slightly different style, you go, but they have just said that the Dragon Reborn can be, and you're like, no, that's not what they said. Basically, they're saying, we're not 100% sure. And that is actually far more psychologically real to the creation of a secondary world, the way that we think of it now. And, you know, that for me is one of the great things about this, that characters say things, they have interpretations, and they can be wrong. They can misinterpret something. And classic at the end of season 1, Moraine believes basically that she's been stilled. She's been gentle. She's been cut off from the source.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Moraine in a second here. Just to loop back to the little girl and speaking of being wrong, let's if she is not already wasn't already a dark friend, I think there's a good chance that she is being sort of led in that direction right now by Ishmael. So that's part of the scary part of that scene, is that he is influencing her and giving her this perspective, and planting
the seduction of evil.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's being portrayed there. Yeah.
And it gets across the threat. The dark friends are everywhere. They're part of every society. And you go, but why would anyone align with evil? And you go, because it doesn't go, I'm evil. We're going to do evil things and horrible things. It's, wouldn't you like this? I can give you power. I can give you status. I can give you the ability to do these things. And you know what? Those people don't deserve that. You deserve that. It's the seductive, persuasive erosion of your moral center, so that you start rationalizing and self-justifying all sorts of absolutely abhorrent behavior.
Evil is being sensible. Yes.
And I think that was wonderfully conveyed in that one short sequence.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I do love that prologue. I thought it was quite strong. Also, another important point, you pointed out the diversity of people around the table. I think it's important to just mention that it looks like some of the people there, maybe some of them are other of the Forsaken, but there are definitely some Shan-Chen present around that table, which is an important point, I think. So they're consolidating some of the things that are not quite as, I think, consolidated perhaps in the books, if I remember correctly, as early on, but yeah, they have to consolidate because they're doing this this massive 14-book series, 15 if you count the prequel.
New Spring.
Yeah, New Spring. So yeah, it's interesting the choices that they made there. I thought it was effective. So you mentioned Moraine. And the next thread from the first episode that I do want to talk about is the Moraine thread with Lan. There's serious tension right now between Moraine and Lan because she believes she's been stilled, that she has been completely cut off from the source, her power from channeling. And Lan is feeling like he's been shut out. And there's also the presence, I think, interestingly, of Varen and her sister, and also Varen's warder there. What was his name? Was it Tomas? Tomas, yeah. So there's an interesting dynamic going on here. I thought there was some good tension included in the scene. Interesting to see Moraine's secrecy, that she is really, I mean, she, of course, if you've read the books, you know that she is a somewhat, and you can see this from even the first season, she's a very independent Aes Sedai. She is a bit of a maverick, in fact. So that independent streak, we really see that continuing here, don't we?
And one of the things I liked about this, because obviously Moraine's treatment of Lan seems really, really harsh and really, really cruel and really, really mean. And yet they included a couple of different things here to mitigate that reading, because the very first thing that we see is Moraine drawing the water from the well and walking all the way up to the house, and then laboriously heating each thing, and then filling the bathtub, and then sitting out, and clearly it's not hot enough, which recalls that scene from season 1 where she had just effortlessly heated the water.
Yeah.
And now she has been reduced so much from who she is, who she thinks she is, her sense of self. Right. She has been crushed, and yet she still puts one foot in front of the other. She is still, I am still Moraine. I am still going to do these things. And it takes more effort now. And we see her break in that when she's sitting there and the tear in her coming down from her eye. Yeah. She's curled up. She is vulnerable. She is alone. She is isolated and cut off. And how that links to the fact that she is cut off from her power.
That went on, honestly, for me, I thought it was well done for the most part. It went on a little too long for me. I was like, okay, we get it. There's the tears and all that. Well, but it was good. It was good.
I know, but we've had this discussion. Yeah. If someone does subtle storytelling, they get told off for, well, you didn't foreshadow that enough. You didn't make it blatant. You didn't make
this
it.
This was not subtle. This was not subtle.
And you go, Right. So you want to, well, they were too blatant, they were too obvious about it. It's always a
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
And it's trying to find that line for each individual viewer, and it's always going to be different. And I thought
Right.
this was emotional, this was powerful.
It
That
was
is
emotional. Yeah.
and that is what is carried across. It too much? People go, oh yeah, I got it by seeing her hike up the hill. But her being naked in the bath is projecting vulnerability.
Vulnerability. Yeah. Yeah.
And she has been stripped of her power. It links to the previous season and that scene that we had where she had used her power and everything about it, you can see how it connects to those things.
Yeah. There's too
If it
many
went
angles for me though. All I'm saying is that was an effective scene. I love the fact that she has to trudge up the hill with the water and that she holds her hand over a bit. But a couple fewer of the angles of her in the bath I could have done.
well,
But yeah.
I know, and I think that's part of our problem as, let's just say, slightly older people,
Uh-huh.
with the more modern technique of shot length.
Uh-huh.
That for a lot of filmmaking, for a lot of TV, it's don't hold a shot for more than 5 seconds, and it's for us where we a lot of the films and TV shows that we remember from when we were younger
Right.
had much longer average shot lengths. We didn't chop from one angle to another angle to a different shot to a different shot over and over again.
Yeah.
And yet that is so common now in modern TV and film because of the expectation of audiences going, well, this is just boring. It's the constant here, change, get a variation, get things moving on screen.
Right.
Is that maybe underestimating the patience of viewers? Might be, but let's face it, it's been borne out that our attention, our desire for these things, our attention spans have shortened. So again, it's a style, it's very common, and it's more noticeable and I think a lot more annoying for
Yeah.
people of a certain demographic.
Nitpicks aside, I did like that scene. There are a couple more important things that happen in this particular thread that we need to talk about. One is the arrival of Doman, who has the whatever it's called, the unbreakable stuff.
Grindar.
Yeah. And then the other is the Fade attack, which we should talk about
Okay.
in this. And anything else you want to talk about, but I want to make sure we cover those two things because we got that poem. And I thought that negotiation between Moraine and Doman was really well done.
Yeah, and so this is part of, I think, again, showing the nuance of Moraine's state of mind. Because
Yeah.
obviously we see the treatment of Lan, and we all like Lan. Like, he's awesome. We love Lan.
Right.
And Moraine's being a meanie. So we think negatively. So you have this showing her vulnerable, showing her being mean, and we're balancing those things. And then when Doman comes in and Moraine is not letting on to anyone else outside of the people who already know that she can't use the power. She doesn't
Right.
have her magic.
Right.
Because Doman comes in and he's deferential. He recognizes her as an Aes Sedai.
Right.
This whole thing. And Moraine is in control. She manipulates him. That is a study in negotiation of, this, and oh, I'm going to feign interest in this. And he's going, I know you're feigning interest in this. You're actually interested in this. And then she's like, oh, you got me, as she's looking at it. And it's on, there was this poem. And well, I'm not going to pay that for just a poem. And the whole negotiation shows that sort of byplay of misdirection, sending people one way when you want the other thing. And it goes to Moraine's plans within plans within plans and never knowing what her true goal is.
Mm.
And again, we like Doman comes, he's brilliant. And you sort of, Moraine tricks him and only gives him one gold. And you're like, well, that's horrible.
But then,
and here's the balance point, because she goes, hang on a sec, those people who were following you, here's 10 gold for nothing.
right.
Get out of here. Go. And she immediately does the right thing.
Yeah.
So we see she's still a good person. And we're moving backwards and forwards between her vulnerability and what she is dealing with. And yet and her desire to do the right thing and to be a nice person and be a good person. Like, it's not a question that she's now mean and horrible and nasty and we should hate her. It's she's still a really good person, but she has reasons for doing things.
One thing
And
that I
that scene was
also
all about manipulation.
absolutely, and interestingly, one thing I enjoyed about the scene as the two of them are trying to manipulate each other and poor Doman is in over his head, they've known each other a long time. He's part of her extended network. I think beneath the mercenary interaction, there's a kind of mutual respect, even affection there, even though they maintain this facade. And that comes through in the acting. I thought that was well done, that there is a kind of, she does care about this guy, even though she treats him in a mercenary fashion for most of that scene. And the crucial moment is indeed when she says, here's 10 more to resupply and everything, and light be with you, buddy, you know. So I
But
thought that was well done.
and he even recognizes that she got the better of him on a deal
Yeah.
because he just like he's been outplayed and he recognizes it as the game. And it's he's done that to other people and she got him this time.
Yeah.
And so there's no hatred for her, or he doesn't sort of go, oh well, you're horrible and I dislike you now because of this. It's like, I got outplayed. I'm a player and I got outplayed. And I love that almost like professionalism to this sort of thing, as well as genuine affection and appreciation of someone else playing the game better than you do. It's again, a lot of this comes out because these are complex things. And the fact that it was the acting portrayed it, the dialogue, the writing was all focused on this. All of this comes across because this is good writing, good acting. And we mightn't like the number of shots and the constant switching between things.
Right.
As if, we all have ADHD. But I think that is something we just kind of have to accept in a lot of modern TV.
Yeah, agreed.
But her relationship with Lan, I want to hear your thoughts on this before I ramble on in mine.
I thought as a carryover from this first season that I already felt mostly positive about that particular relationship. There were some subtle moments in the first season between Moraine and Lan, and they were building on those in this episode effectively. And that the big change that happened at the end of the first season was Moraine believing that Ishmael had cut her off from her power, and that this is completely affecting her identity and all of her relationships. She's in mourning. And Varen explains this to Lan. She attempts to soothe him and help him understand where Moraine is coming from in all of this. So yeah, I thought it was good. I actually think that there was some subtlety, some nuance, that Lan's struggles felt real. I like what they're doing with Lan in this show. I know some people want to see Lan just be this very stoic, no emotion, nothing at all kind of character. So this character in this show, I think, is a bit different from the one we get in the books. The one in the books seems on the surface much more stoic and resigned to whatever happens. This Lan, I like the emotion we're getting from this character.
And I think part of this is misunderstanding what stoicism is.
Yeah,
stoicism does not mean emotionless.
Right.
It means that you don't allow your emotion to show where it can be seen.
Right.
Batman is frequently talked about as being stoic, this stoic sort of persona. And yet we know that when Batman's in private, he can still punch things because he's annoyed. Right. And he lets his irritation, his anger out in private. One of the great things they did in season 1 was they showed the depth of Lan's emotion, that they communicate that while he doesn't outwardly project and emote his emotion, he has incredibly deep and powerful emotions that's contained within him. Right. And it's when we see him in these moments in private that we get the greatest glimpses into his emotion. Right. And for a visual medium, having him be wooden the entire time, it isn't necessarily the most pleasing visual way to portray stuff.
Right.
It can be good. It can be done in other things. And you go, yeah, but I like this portrayal. When we saw Moraine, when she was introduced in this episode, she's isolated on her own getting the water. When we get reintroduced to Lan, He is on his own training. He is working out his frustrations, his rage, his anger. He's feeling lost because he's lost his bond. He can't feel Moraine anymore. A
Right.
presence he has had for 20 years. He can't feel her emotions. He can't feel her presence.
That's a
This is
loss. Yeah.
unsettling.
Yeah.
And so we see him while she is doing the whole bath routine, and we see that as her aspect and being isolated. He's
Right.
standing on his own, going through the thing that reassures him, which is the sword forms.
Yeah, another moment that effectively emphasizes both of their vulnerability is the Fade attack. I think that was pretty well done scene, action-wise, and we see Moraine really helpless there, which is not a feeling that she enjoys. And of course, Lan jumps in, but he on his own was not going to be sufficient to fight back those three Fades. So the other Aes Sedai have to come in and their warder and save the day. But I thought that was a good scene.
Yeah, and what I like is the setup of it is basically Moraine has been doing the thing that you always saw in those movies about the dog getting into danger or something, and the kid going like throwing a rock and going run away. You know, it's sending. She's been pushing Lan away,
Right.
because she feels inadequate now that she's lost her power, that she's not a proper Aes Sedai. She's still going to do her thing. She still has her drive, but
Yeah.
she's pushing him away. And so we start seeing that. And then when Lan, first of all, the dinner scene where Lan says something along the lines of, I think that's the first time I've ever been told I need to listen more.
Right. Yeah.
Lan has a brilliant sense of humor.
Yeah.
But when he goes up and he leaves the dinner there and he's kind of looking around, and then he realizes that Moraine's not there. That's, and then we cut to Moraine's gone away. She's suddenly ambushed. And Lan appears because he realizes that she's left and he's gone after her. So all of those things are the implications of the different actions.
Yeah.
And in that, seeing the Fades do that travel through the shadow, and then the Fade, and he leans out of the shadow to look around. And Moraine notices this and goes, there's a shadow right next to me here, gets her knife ready. And you go, so even without her magical ability, she is still smart. She is still capable. She is still impressive. She has decades of experience that she is drawing on, and traveling with Lan, who has taught her stuff to do with weapons. Then we see Lan arrive because suddenly she's like, mad. Lan arrives and saves her.
Yeah.
But while he is a consummate swordsman and absolutely brilliant, he's facing two of the most deadly opponents in the world.
Three initially, but he dispatches
he kills one, but then he faces off against two.
Right.
He's facing these two supernatural threats, and he doesn't have access to his warder abilities because the warder bond has been severed. So he doesn't have. He almost has to relearn how to fight, because if this is how he's been fighting for 20 years, expecting his strength to be a certain way,
more
his
endurance
speed to be a certain,
suddenly
he's operating without that. So we get why he was training so hard, and he does this phenomenal fight against them, and then they're both wounded, get rescued, and the first thing he does is he looks over at Rick. What are you hiding from me? Not like his focus. He is laser focused, and again, so much of this is the character of Lan. I love this interpretation of these characters, because you can see the truth of who they are from the books, and they're being realized in a different way, and yet they are discernibly the same characters. Lan is duty bound. Duty lies heavier than a mountain. He doesn't show off his emotions in public, but he does crack. He does have them. And when in private, when in those situations where it is not public, we see them and we know how powerful these emotions are. So like all of that has been wonderfully communicated, building on what season 1 did, and now we see it again in season 2. So I actually really like that.
Good. Yeah. Well, another thread we need to talk about is everything happening at the White Tower, primarily with Egwene and Nynaeve, and the bit of a tug of war going on over Nynaeve, who is apparently the most powerful channeler they've seen in a long time. So you have Alana on the one hand from the Green Aja, who is an ally up to this point. We've been seeing, at least she's being presented as an ally of Moraine's. And she's trying to be protective of both Egwene and Nynaeve and in many ways, and to help train them. And then, of course, Leandrin is wanting Nynaeve for her coterie, if you will, and is trying to assert control over her. So that little tug of war is going on. But you also have the inner stuff going on with both of those characters. Nynaeve is unable to channel unless she's really pissed off or scared. So that vast power comes with a catch at this point. And then, of course, Egwene is struggling with her, I guess, feelings of inadequacy, having to work hard, not being as powerful as Nynaeve, et cetera, et cetera. So there's
and her jealousy
going on there. Go ahead.
But her jealousy, because every time she's standing there, someone seems to say, and Nynaeve's the most powerful person we've seen. And every time Egwene's going like, I'm right here. Like,
right.
Do you have to say this every time?
Yeah.
Everyone goes, oh, Egwene, like, you're powerful, but not as powerful as Nynaeve. Every time you go, oh, that's well done, Egwene. Like, you're good, but she's awesome. Every time I feel bad for her.
A scene that really presents, I think, especially all these dynamics compactly, I think, effectively, is that initial scene in the White Tower where Alana presents this challenge to them, saying, all right, here's your dirty water. He pours it from the bucket that Egwene had been using to clean up stuff, and then says, all right, you're going to drink this water. I'll teach you how to clean it first, but you got to clean it on your own. And that whole scene I thought was interesting. Nynaeve eventually saying, all right, fine, I'll drink the water. Yummy, yummy.
Well, and as a wisdom, she's used to drinking horrible potions. But
yeah,
the whole sequence that they had there,
yeah,
I liked it. This is about good, concise writing. It does a lot of different things. So first of all, reintroducing the characters, reintroducing their dynamic, showing that they have moved on from where we left off in season 1. They're now novices. They have been there for 5 months. Foreshadowing a major event about how you can use the weaves to purify something, just dropped in there. Here's this thing. This is this technique to separate out something that is tainted. And it's dropped. They don't make it flashy and go, we know what's happening. It's thrown in there in a perfectly natural way, as this is how Alana's going to teach them. And remember, we like Alana. Alana's fun, and she's sensual, and she does all of these things. Right. But think of the lesson that she just set the students. She's a strong, harsh mistress as well. Right. If you don't do this, you're going to have to drink this foul water. Like, Aes Sedai training is tough. And we get a sense of the different approaches that the different Aes Sedai have, not only by Adja, but by personality. They all have different ways, but they are all tough women. They do not suffer fools gladly. And they all have their own ways of doing it and are not afraid of being brutal. But the type of brutality changes.
You see that difference between Alana and Leandrin. And I mean, Leandrin's not even allowed to train novices because apparently she went a little overboard in the past. But she very much wants to be Nynaeve's mentor, and there could be a host of possible reasons for this. But I thought that there was that scene where she shields temporarily Nynaeve, and there's that when Nynaeve pushes back out of fear or anger or a combination thereof. That was a pretty powerful scene, I thought.
And it recalls exactly what happened to Moraine. So at the end of last season, we saw something being imposed and wrapping around Moraine, and now we see Leandrin shielding Nynaeve. Now Moraine believes that she's been cut off, but they've just re-emphasized that there's another option that is different to stilling
temporary. Yeah.
And it was done by one of the Forsaken in the previous season, who again, are so much more powerful and talented, and they have forgotten more about magic in this world. than the Aes Sedai over thousands of years know.
Right.
Um, but I thought that was really nice because we look at what Leandrin does as brutal, and she is direct, brutal, it's violent, and because that's her philosophical approach to the world. Everyone is an enemy until they are a tool or a weapon to be wielded.
Right.
Whereas you look at Alana, and Alana's a lot more persuasive, and but they're both very difficult lessons.
Mm.
So I thought it contrasted what we might refer to as their pedagogical style, but the ultimate point was the same. It's get the student to learn the lesson.
Yeah. The difference
And
being, though, that when Alana was teaching her lesson, you never felt that the student was in possible danger of their life. Whereas in that scene when she was pushing Nynaeve, it felt like, oh, is she gonna, there was a little piece of me like, oh, she could kill her right now. Like, she has made her very vulnerable. And that look on the actor's face playing and Leandrin, it looked like she wanted to kill her almost. I mean, it was that threatening, I thought.
and and this is the thing that I think is so good about this. Leandrin is still Aes Sedai. She
Right.
is still in absolute control of what she is doing. She knew she could use the airwaves to push Nynaeve, and it's threatening and it's violent because it's an overt demonstration of power. But she knew that wouldn't kill her. But Nynaeve would feel threatened. You go, how, like, she weighed out exactly the level of threat she needed to send Nynaeve's way for Nynaeve to have the reaction to attack her back, and then immediately shielded her. Because she was it. Leandrin is in control that entire sequence. She might appear unhinged to
There was
us.
a moment when she was pushed back herself where it was like, ooh.
Yeah, but it's like she gets pushed back, and it's almost like she's going, yes. You know that scene in Return of the Jedi? Yes, yes, give in to your hate, give in to your anger.
Yeah.
Feel the power. That's what she's doing.
Right.
But the Emperor wasn't scared of Luke Skywalker giving in to the anger,
Right.
because he was comfortable in his position of knowing how much more powerful and talented he was. Leandrin feels the same way because the trick up her sleeve is, yeah, but I'm just going to shield you in a split second.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but then we think of Alana and we go, oh, but Alana's so much nicer. And we have that wonderful, hilarious moment where Egwene goes to talk to her about and there's a miscommunication. Which again is this wonderful moment of the sort of the domestic side of life in the White Tower. Yeah. And one of the things that I like about this is in the books, you hear that they have these chores, but you don't really visualize the drudgery the same way that you really got a sense of their day-to-day drudgery that we got in that very short sequence. And even on their time off, we see a bunch of the initiates are overlooking and watching the warders train, which any book reader knows is a big thing that happens. The exploration of life in the White Tower, that sort of slice of life, and showing us all these different aspects of it. And when you think about it, it's actually in quite a short space of time, a real sense of what their day-to-day life was like, how the different Ajas function and perform. We see in that meeting discussing Nynaeve's education, that the Ajas don't agree. They all have different motivations. They all have different plans.
Right.
And you can see Leandrin, sort of her manipulations. We see Alana standing up against it. And of course, we naturally like Alana a lot more. But all of that was so wonderfully communicated. The Ajas are all Aes Sedai, but they do not speak with one voice. They do not move with one purpose. It's factions. All about infighting and factions and power.
Yeah, good. All right, well, let's move on. There are one more major thread, and then there's just a little bit of Rand, a little bit of Matt in this episode. We can mention them at the end, but the other major thread presented here is with Perrin and the Shinarians, led by Ingtar, also including Uno, And interesting how they bring Elias into the story as a tracker working for this group. So that's, you know, obviously a divergence from the books, but they have to bring all this together very quickly somehow. So they bring in the character Elias in this manner, which I thought was fine. I'm absolutely good with that. And there's his Elias clearly is recognizing Perrin for what he is. And so that dynamic is developing. Now, of course, they're chasing after the Horn of Valir, which was taken by Podden Fane at the end of the previous season. So that's their mission here. And so I thought there were some interesting things going on. There was a scene with Ingtar and Perrin, a little bit awkwardly presented, I felt. There was a bit of a direction issue, I think, in that scene where they had buried the traitor, the Shinarian traitor who had let Podden Fane in. And they're in the woods there, and they have this grave, and et cetera, et cetera. And Perrin is asking Ingtar, "Why would you do this for this traitor? You know, I'm really mad right now, you know." And they had this whole conversation with everyone else just sort of standing around with nothing to do. I thought that they should have gone off on their own and had that conversation rather than have it there. But the conversation itself, the dialogue itself, was fine. The conversation makes me think a little bit about Ingtar and what's going on with him. Because now, obviously, I do have some advantages having read the books, but they're presenting his character as a little bit suspicious, I think, during some of these scenes, like where Perrin is asking, well, why do you like this guy? He was a traitor to you. And Ingtar's response was interesting, I thought. So there's some nuance being introduced into this thread here. So what did you think about this part?
Interestingly, this is one of my pet peeves. It is one aspect of the scene. In season 1, there was a scene with the White Cloaks where they had this camp, and yet the grass hadn't been matted down into the rows between it. They're White Cloaks, even though they're walking through this bright green grass. None of the White Cloaks had any dirt or anything or grass stains on the very bottom of their hems. And that bugs me because it goes to the reality, the verisimilitudinous of the reality of the world, the diegesis, making it feel real.
Right.
So my tiny pet peeve, and it is a nitpick, is, oh, look, they have all of these candles and little candle holders and blankets ready to go to bury a bunch of people. Where did they get these from? They've been out for months tracking this guy, and they went, you know what? In one of these packs, I keep a whole load of funeral candles. You know, just in case. I have about 20 of them in case we have a.
They also don't look like they just dug a bunch of graves either.
And also, I brought like 20 extra blankets just in case we had to wrap people in blankets and bury them. And you know what? This is something that you just in TV and in film, sometimes you just go, yeah, just accept it.
Must have been a Boy Scout. He was very prepared, right?
So. Because if you start applying that level of necessity to the realism, almost every single secondary fantasy world breaks apart. All of those sequences in films where they walk in and it's a romantically lit room with hundreds of candles. You go, do you know how long it takes to light 100 candles and how quickly they all burn down and then have to be replaced? That in all of these fantasy films, there are little moments like that you just go, yeah, it is theatrical. Just go with it. So that was my one tiny pet peeve with that thing, because it's the whole candle issue thing and magically having the materials to do stuff for the necessity of the scene. One thing that I liked in that was, again, they tried to bury them in that circular formation that they'd used in season 1. And this time, because they're doing it, you know, quickly and out in it, it's not a neat circle. It's slightly off kilter. It's not perfect. And I was so glad that they'd added in that flaw.
Yeah.
Because that actually made it feel more real than, oh yes, we managed to draw out a perfect circle. We found all of the exact points for where these graves are going to go. Yeah. The fact that it was slightly off, although it disturbs my sense of order, sold it as more real. But with Perrin and that whole discussion,
right, one of the end of which that's the discussion at the end of which Ingtar suggests, well, maybe Podden Fane had his reasons, and that's the creepy little creep creepy part in there. It's like, oh, where's he coming from? You know?
One of the things I liked about this whole section with Perrin, and also with the moment later on, the linking of the Beltane lanterns with all the various points of
That I
views,
liked the Beltane, having the parallel them all, like you said. Yeah, that was
is
nice.
because one of the worries about Perrin's storyline and how they started it with Lila was they were just going to fridge Lila, and there's his motivation is done. But in this, we see how this is not being forgotten and just brushed under the rug, and we're just moving on with Perrin. This is going to the heart of Perrin's struggle in the entire story, choosing order, chaos, the beast or humanity, the axe or the hammer, and then his inability and difficulty in engaging with the two women who enter his life. Lila is so much a part of this, and you go in that one sequence, although it's not nice and it's not the world's greatest trope in the world, but they're actually paying attention to it. They're paying attention to the ramifications, and they are tying it in to every aspect. And that moment when he lights the lantern and he takes the wedding ring off and puts it to float out, and then cannot let go, and he takes the wedding ring back.
Yeah,
that is one of my favorite moments, because it goes to his struggle, the beast, the wolf, or and being berserk, and the axe, and choosing violence, and all of those different things wrapped up into that complex feeling. Why doesn't he just choose it? Oh, well, he has a reason. He is still wearing his dead wife's ring. Because this is the guilt that he is carrying. This goes to everything. And even when he is talking about it, yeah, he blames Padan Fain. Padan Fain didn't kill Lila. And it's his struggle to tell other people about what actually happened. The need to blame other people. And that is all about his psychology of trying to work through this thing that he did and why he is so petrified of it. And to be honest, the actor who plays Perrin in the first season, Marcus did, he had a tendency when he was acting to sit with his mouth open a lot.
Right.
He doesn't do it as anywhere near as often now, and it feels like all of the actors have far more readily settled into their characters and their roles. He feels far more embedded and a presence as Perrin now.
Yeah, I would say that I did not have a problem and major issues with the acting. I thought the actors did a good job with what they were given. I think sometimes some scenes, like I mentioned, that scene where Perrin is talking with Ingtar, and the other characters have nothing to do but stand there awkwardly as if they're not listening, but they really are just close enough to hear every word. That's a directorial decision. I think that probably doesn't always allow the actors to do their best during scenes like that when they're put in this weird position. So that's something that should have been thought through. But the actors themselves, I think, are doing very fine with what they're given. But we have a couple more tiny things. Rand does make an appearance. I think they do show Selene, and if you've read the books, you have a pretty good idea who Selene is. But I'm not going to say anything about that because that would be kind of spoilery. The other, I think a little bit more we get of is Matt, but not very much. We just see that he's a prisoner in the tower of Leandrin specifically, and that she is trying to isolate him from his friends, that she is keeping back the fact that he is being talked about by his friends. She's censoring she's reading him the letter from Perrin, but leaving out the part about him and saying, see, your friends don't even talk about you. So yeah, she's being manipulative and mean.
And there are a couple of things about Matt. First of all, yeah, it's a new actor.
Yeah, which is fine. You know, they had to get one.
And you know what? I saw him and went, okay, yeah, he's Matt.
Yeah, same here.
He actually, I was surprised at how quickly, being used to a previous actor, that a new actor inhabited the role. And he's not the same, but he's still Matt. And it worked. I was really surprised at that. I was expecting it to be much more difficult for me to get used to a new actor playing a central role. Yeah. And yet it worked out. So I was impressed with that. One of the other things that I really liked in that scene all the other time mentions about this time gap that they're on have said 5 months. And Matt says 6. And you go, oh, they made a mistake in the script. Yeah. No, Matt didn't go with them.
Right.
And Moraine had sent the message to the Red, so he has been imprisoned longer than they have been back. And it was just, again, a nice touch showing paying attention to timelines. And the showrunners and the writers and everyone, they were always going to have difficulties trying to start this season because of all of the things that impacted and changed their plans for the end of last season. It was clearly never originally intended that Matt would be separated from the group. That right. When we saw those sequences at the end of season 1, that was clearly that actor had left. They no longer have access to that actor. They can't just find one in the middle of a pandemic. That's a
difficult problem. Yeah.
So they had to do something. And now that has ramifications. And instead of we're just going to pretend that the end of season 1 never happened and it actually happened in a completely different way, and they went, no, this is our bed. We made it. We made it, so we're going to lie in it. And they're trying to find ways to bring things back to a natural point where they can do the crossovers. And so they picked up on Moraine's line of telling the Red sisters about Matt.
Right.
And that's where he's been. So I was really impressed that although there were problems with the end of season 1, right. They haven't just ignored it. They gave us a time gap to allow people to heal, to recover from things.
Yeah.
For people to move on. And throughout this, we have touched on, and they have reintroduced each of the characters. They've given them a scene and a sequence to really illustrate who they are. Egwene going like the super keener student that she is, who wants to be teacher's pet, going to Alana to get super special lessons. Nynaeve standing up to Alana and going, you never said it had to be clean, as she drinks the fondest because she is stubborn and proud and will not bend. Lan with his whole sequence with the sword and showing his physicality. Matt Shawshanking his way out of a prison cell.
Yeah.
Each of the characters that we stopped by and got time with,
right.
We got scenes that went to the heart of their character, that went to who they are and what they mean to the show, as well as recognizing what happened in the past and connecting the previous scenes and advancing plot and advancing the story and building out the world and getting us a deeper, broader glimpse of what this world is like.
Yeah.
And so when you look at all of this, it is absolutely fine to say, I don't enjoy this adaptation. I don't like this adaptation. I don't enjoy the decisions that they have made and where they are going with it. But this is not bad writing. This is not bad adaptation.
Right.
They clearly know the source material. Anyone with half a brain can see that they know and understand the source material. There are far too many events that you can see connect to other events. They know their own writing and they are being consistent as possible, given all of the constraints and things that went wrong in season 1, to go, right, we're now doing this thing. It is very clear that this is present. You can see how much they are building into each scene and how there are multiple levels of information being conveyed. That is all good writing. Is it perfect? No TV show has perfect writing. There are always going to be things that we don't like. There are going to be things that we go, that could have been done a wee bit better.
Plenty, yeah.
And we have to accept that. It is TV. It is a bunch of different people, not just writers, not just directors, not just executive producers, not just studio executives. There are a lot of people who have influence on what is going on screen. And considering trying to do the 14 books in 8 seasons of 8 episodes per season,
a huge task,
and 1 hour per episode, how do you tell that central story? Right. Because it is physically impossible to do it, because we saw what happened when you tried. First episode of season 1. Here's a whole load of events from the first book,
that was too
running
rushed
through really
for
quickly.
me.
And
Yeah.
it was exhausting. It was just one thing after another. It didn't feel,
It was
like,
disjointed is what it was. Yeah.
because it was constantly, here's this thing, here's this thing, here's this thing, here's this
Right.
thing.
Right.
Now we're getting, no, we're going to tell the story, but we cannot take every single scene and sequence from the books, because we can't do that. What do those scenes, what is the central aspect of those scenes?
Mhm.
Now, in the space that we have, in the word count that we have, in the time period that we have, what can we do to convey that?
Right.
And I am so impressed with the improvement on season 1. And I think this shows what can happen when you aren't filming in a pandemic, when you don't suddenly have locations at the last minute being taken away,
And actors.
when you're not pressured to get CGI done in an emergency, when actors settle more into the role, writers settle more into who these characters are. This is all stuff that usually improves over time, and it has in this instance. These worlds and locations feel a lot more solid now.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for helping me to appreciate episode 1 more. I was not opposed to continuing to watch the series after watching it. It was not super enthusiastic either, but this has been a lot of fun talking about it. And so I'm looking forward to watching future episodes. Our next discussion will be on A Critical Dragon on episode 2. So be on the lookout for that. And we will continue to do all 8 episodes from season 2, and probably have a bit of a wrap up as well at the end of it all. So thank you.
And Philip, before you say goodbye to everyone,
Yeah.
thank you very much for having me back to talk about this.
Thank
you very much for your extreme patience as I go off on these long rants about stuff. And thank you very much for being a lot of fun to talk to about these things, because you don't enjoy it as much as I do. And, you know, it's, we don't hate each other over this.
No.
I see things that you don't. You see things that I don't. Things that bother you don't bother me, and vice versa. No one, and this applies to all viewers, all readers, no one is saying you have to like it, or that you have to love it, or that you have to hate it, or that you have to just dislike it. It can be meh for you. But that's all to do with how much we enjoy things. But if we're really going to get down and evaluate it, that involves actually looking at what it's doing, not what it isn't doing.
Right. And I think you've shown very well that there is plenty to analyze and talk about in terms of what they are successfully doing. So I suspect I'm not the only person who's going to have listened to you and emerge from this with a slightly, I think, greater appreciation for the show. So thank you very much, Professor Fireballs. You've done it once again. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to head over to A Critical Dragon to see what we make of episode 2. Until then.